Sometimes you have to see to believe and witness history as it unfolds. When the news is breaking, watch with the newsroom of The Washington Post. We explain what's happening and why it matters.
Thank you for choosing to watch the headlines as they're being written by our journalists. You can subscribe with a special offer at washingtonpost.com/watch. Subscribing through that link lets everyone here, from the front lines to the control room, know that you care about our continued efforts to inform the public,
Protect the First Amendment, and foster a healthy democracy. We could not do this without you.
President Biden makes a rare primetime address tonight focused on what the White House calls the battle for the soul of the nation. Welcome to this special report from the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. With only a little more than 2 months until the midterm elections, President Biden is speaking to the American people tonight about what he sees as an extremist threat to democracy. The location? Philadelphia, on the grounds of Independence Hall, where the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were signed. Joining me in our Washington Post newsroom tonight, Rhonda Colvin and James Homan. Welcome to you both. Rhonda, why this speech now?
Well, timing is really everything for Biden and the Democrats as well, Democrats running for office across this country. You can look at the timing 2 ways. On one side, this is timely because all Americans are very familiar with threats to elected officials, threats to FBI staff and agents after the Mar-a-Lago search, threat to election workers. We've heard a lot about that through the January 6th panel. And there are also a lot of candidates right now in very tight races, whether it be for local school boards or secretaries of state or even the Senate, who are running on the big lie. They are saying they want to relitigate it if they get elected to Congress or to their the seats that they're seeking. So on that side, this is a really timely speech that Biden has given. But it is also very advantageous because politically, Biden is doing pretty good. He's having a good summer. First, you've seen some of his policy initiatives that he's been trying to get through Congress. Those passed before the August recess through the Inflation Reduction Act. You've also seen in the last week he was pushed to do something about student loan debt and has announced that he will do a forgiveness program. There are all of these things that he kind of is encouraged by right now, and as well as other Democrats in Congress. And they are going around the country trying to say that they are the party of progress right now. So you can expect tonight he will likely try to draw a line that the Democrats are about progress and work and these kitchen table issues that people are concerned about, and that there's this segment of Republicanism that is extreme.
Well, Jorge Ribas joins us now from Philadelphia, site of the president's speech tonight. Jorge, set the scene for us there.
Hi, Libby. Yeah, so we're outside here in Independence Hall Park, just outside of Independence Hall. Behind me is the podium where the president will be speaking shortly. And around me are some chairs and people sitting there, people from city leaders, union officials gathered around here to hear the president speak. The park itself is closed off, but you see people in the building areas, the steps of the building around me, the streets, waiting to hear the president speak. And as you mentioned, there cannot be a more symbolic place for the president to talk about democracy than here in Independence Hall. It's, of course, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. It's where the Constitutional Congress met and ratified the Constitution. It's a city where, the Liberty Bell, Ben Franklin's house, is a few blocks away. It's a place where it's very symbolic. He could have given this speech at the Oval Office. He could have done it at the White House. But he chose this very deliberate place to give this speech on what he said are attacks on American democracy, the MAGA movement, as he's called it, labeling it as semi-fascist, saying they're anti-democratic.
So tell us more about what we expect to hear from the president tonight, Jorge.
Yeah, we don't know if President Biden will talk about former President Donald Trump by name, whether he'll call out GOP members, but he'll definitely talk about what I said before was the MAGA movement and these anti-democratic, what he says are these anti-democratic attacks on voter integrity, on voting, on the continuing of these conspiracy theories and lies that he said on the 2020 election. He will appeal to Americans in that regard, but he'll also mention the recent Supreme Court decision on abortion and talk about how this MAGA movement is trying to take America backwards. He'll mention that as well. But again, he's going to try, as he does in these big speeches, to appeal to all Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike.
All right, thanks so much, Jorge. Stand by for us. I want to bring in James Hohmann. James, why are the words so important? Let's talk about this question of talking about Donald Trump by name, or the MAGA movement, or, you know, the Republican Party.
President Biden wants to center these midterms as a referendum on democracy itself, and really a choice between not just Trump, but Trumpism and what Biden presents as sort of his traditional view of how government is supposed to work. The White House is trying really hard for tonight's speech not to feel partisan. Of course, it is political in its nature, but Biden is trying to show Americans, tell Americans that democracy itself is going to be on the ballot this fall.
Let's bring Jorge back in Philadelphia. You know, Jorge, this isn't the only time we've seen the president in Pennsylvania this week. Tell us more about what he's been doing.
Yeah, this sort of feels like kind of a kickoff event for him for these midterm elections, right? He was in Wilkes-Barre on Monday talking to people there about gun control, and he's here today to talk about American democracy. He's going to be next week on Labor Day. He's going to be in Pittsburgh at the Labor Day parade there with Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman. He'll be along with Josh Shapiro, who's running for governor. He's definitely, as Rhonda mentioned earlier, he's riding some wins, late wins this summer. I actually was when I was here setting up earlier, I talked to a resident here who was kind of just peeking around, and he said that, you know, he thought that 2 months ago the president wouldn't be here, but he's got the wind at his back, and he feels emboldened to come here and give this big speech. But this really feels like he's, you know, the Democrats know that there's a play here in the state of Pennsylvania. It's a place where President Biden feels comfortable going to. And so he's definitely here to campaign for the Democrats in these two races.
Great point, Jorge. Thank you so much. We'll check in with you later on. Rhonda, we are expecting President Biden to begin his speech in about 25 minutes time, and our Washington Post team will be here until then and then afterwards with some analysis. Let's talk more about this midterm election coming up and the significance of a state like Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is highly significant right now. You'll remember also back in 2019 and 2020, candidate Biden, when he was running for president, he spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. That turned out to work to his advantage at the end when Pennsylvania was one of those states we were waiting for results in. And Biden, as well as Democrats, know that this is a state that will carry a lot of weight when we get to November. It has an open Senate seat that is going to be closely watched. There's also the governor's race there, and both parties know that this is a pretty important state to spend some time in, have face time with voters. And I like what Jorge said, talking to that person who said, you know, Biden may not have been here 2 months ago, and that might be correct because, you know, at that time, there was a lot of talk about the historical trend is that the party in power in Congress, the president's party, would not be able to keep their seats as the majority, and that was looking like what might happen in November. But of course, we don't know what will happen in November, but it does look like Democrats are aware that they have a little bit of an edge right now, especially after the Dobbs case was decided by the Supreme Court. That angered a lot of Americans, and they're pointing at Republicans on that. And Democrats are riding that wave as well. So there are a lot of things that seem to happen all at once in the last few months that have helped Biden, that have helped Senate and House Democrats to sort of have a little bit of momentum. And they're not stopping. It does not appear that they're stopping. The Senate comes back in next week. The House will follow as well. And from what it looks like, they are just going to keep beating this drum that they are the party of progress.
You know, James, I talked to some Democratic operatives a few months ago who were frustrated that Biden was not out more, right? That he was staying in the White House and the Washington bubble more than they liked because they wanted to see him selling things and also getting involved in the midterm march. Talk to us about how things are changing if they are.
Well, now he has something to sell. Democrats have passed a bunch of legislation, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the reconciliation bill, and his approval rating is improving. And as a result, Democrats want to campaign with him. To be clear, the historical trends are still very strongly against Democrats. Republicans are overwhelmingly favored to win control of the House just based on redistricting alone. The economy is still a great cause of concern for the Democrats. But there was a Wall Street Journal poll today that showed that Biden's approval rating has jumped to 45%, still 54% disapprove, but that's up from 42% in their last poll and up from the high 30s in other recent polls. And that means that Democrats are more willing to appear with Biden. A lot of operatives have wanted the president to get out. The president has wanted to get out. But not everyone everywhere wants to be with him. That has sort of changed. Tony Fabrizio, who is Donald Trump's pollster, was quoted today saying that the Dobbs decision has been like a defibrillator, activating the Democratic base, especially younger voters who were tuned out, women who weren't otherwise planning to vote. And now Democrats lead in the generic ballot 47% to 44%. That's flipped from right before the Supreme Court handed down the Dobbs decision in June. So that does give the president this wind at his back. That is very much the context. Labor Day is traditionally considered the start of the fall campaign. And this speech is about setting the table for that home stretch.
Rhonda, let's talk about some of these legislative accomplishments that President Biden wants to tout, and also some of the news factors that are outside of the White House's control, whether it's Supreme Court verdicts, wars overseas, or natural disasters. What is Biden looking at on his portfolio?
Well, earlier this summer, you had the Senate and House pass gun reform, and that's something that Congress has not done in about 30 years. And while it falls short from what a lot of gun reform advocates had wanted, it is something. And these days, anything really passing through Congress does take a lot of time, a lot of negotiations, and they were able to get that through. There was also, most recently, before their August recess, was the Inflation Reduction Act. That included initiatives that Biden wanted to get through earlier with the Build Back Better plan that kind of fell flat, dealing with climate and dealing with prescription drug costs. There is mixed results that some economists are looking at this and wondering, will it really help if inflation? It doesn't look like it will in the short term, but they are calling it Inflation Reduction Act and saying that this is an economic package and a social package that will help a lot of Americans. But you've also had some things that, like you said, Biden really didn't have control over and didn't have, take active steps in, and that would include that Dobbs decision. That's something that immediately when it came out, Democrats were in front of the Supreme Court, marching with those who opposed that decision by the Supreme Court. They've been in their districts, making it a centerpiece of their campaigns, and they will likely continue that. So that sort of fell into their lap when it came to the timing of this summer. There's also been the January 6th committee, and at first when we were covering it, a lot of people were saying, I don't think we can learn anything new. We know everything we know about January 6th, and it turns out by now we're finding out things almost weekly that this committee has revealed, or at least had the DOJ look further into. So you're seeing these type of headlines come out, and you can say that that has kind of shifted the political winds a little bit. To James's earlier point that, yes, Republicans are certainly still holding on a slight edge in some polling in a lot of races, and they may take the House, maybe the Senate as well, but we still don't know. But at this juncture right now, the Labor Day juncture, we're seeing that the Democrats are a little stronger than they were a few weeks ago and certainly a few months ago.
Rhonda, we talked about the importance of Pennsylvania. The man running for governor on the Republican ticket, Doug Mastriano, is one of these MAGA Republicans. He was at the Capitol on January 6th. He is an election denier, and there are other Trump-endorsed candidates around the country like that. What is President Biden trying to say tonight about those candidates?
Well, there's this phrase that he's been using back to a couple months ago. In fact, I think it was around the spring when he has been saying these are MAGA Republicans. And he's trying to make a distinction there that not all Republicans are in an extreme group of wanting to storm the Capitol or wanting to hurt election workers or any of that. He's saying that it's just a sect of Republicans who are following the former President Trump. So you will likely hear that phrase a lot tonight, MAGA Republicans. And saying that these are the Republicans that stand in the way of democracy, that are threatening the democracy that America holds so dear. So you will likely hear him kind of beat that drum over and over again. He did when he gave that earlier speech this week in Pennsylvania. He mentioned MAGA Republicans and how it was dangerous to America.
Let's bring in Mary Beth Albright. So, Mary Beth, there's this question of the word fascism, and in fact, semi-fascism, and President Biden's comparison to the MAGA philosophy. Tell us more.
And James and Jorge all talk about tonight in a speech last week President Biden gave to the Democratic National Committee supporters. He used those words. Let's take a look at that graphic of the words that he used, specifically extreme MAGA, and relating it to semi-fascism. And later on in the week, his press secretary was asked about those comments specifically, and let's take a look at what she said.
On the semi-fascism comment, is this something we're going to hear more of, that phrase? Is it something the president's going to kind of embrace? Or is there any sense that it was, a little impromptu and it's going to turn into a kind of basket of deplorables thing that he regrets and tries to be quiet about?
Look, I was very clear when laying out and defining what MAGA Republicans have done, and you look at the definition of fascism and you think about what they're doing in attacking our democracy, what they're doing in taking away our freedoms, wanting to take away our rights, our voting rights. I mean, that is what that is. It is very clear, and that's why he made that powerful speech that you heard from him last night. And he has not shied away from saying that. You have heard him maybe not use that specific word, but you have heard him certainly use that definition.
And hear, Libby, that both Biden and Jean-Pierre have looked beyond Trump when they're talking about what's happening in America right now. And they look to the underlying ideals that seem to be resonating with some Americans right now and comparing them with semi-fascism. And the 10 poles of fascism are a dictator, centralized power, suppression of political opposition, often with political violence, centralization of the economy so that the nation can be self-sufficient, militarism, and intervening in the lives of individuals for the betterment of the country and this nation. Now, in this way, it focuses very much on the country. And that is, when you compare it with the tent poles of democracy, indirect opposition with democracy, in which the individuals give power to the government, not the other way around, and that the government gets its power specifically from the people granting it to the government. And you can see Joe Biden, of course, making that through line just from the location of where he's giving it to his speech tonight, where the Declaration of Independence was debated and signed. Libby?
Thanks so much, Mary Beth Albright. I always feel smarter after I hear you dig into the history of these things. James, let's talk about the risk and reward of talking about fascism and the pushback that the president has gotten from Republicans, even some Democrats, at using that label.
Yeah, don't expect to hear President Biden use that term again, semi-fascism, in his speech tonight. Instead, based on some early excerpts that we've seen from the White House, he'll talk about MAGA forces, not even MAGA Republicans necessarily. He's trying to draw a distinction to make clear that he's not saying all Republicans are like this. And he'll say, democracy is not guaranteed. But then he'll call out specific candidates on the ballot, not by name, but he's not throwing all Republicans in this basket who don't respect and abide by the results of elections. So, to your point about the controversy, I think that there's a lot of sensitivity about invoking fascism. Millions and millions of people died during the 20th century under fascist regimes. We've obviously for years heard Republicans accuse Democrats of socialism and communism, and we know how much that bothers them. Republicans are just as bothered by being called fascists.
Well, White House reporter Tyler Pager joins us now. Tyler, how do the White House and President Biden see this speech fitting into their fall strategy or even in the arc of his presidency?
Yeah, Libby, that's a great question, and that's exactly what they see. They see this as both of those things. One, this is an argument that the president has been making since he launched his campaign for president back in 2019. That slogan, the battle for the soul of the nation, undergirded a lot of that effort and was the impetus for him to run. I covered his presidential campaign, traveling around the country with him, and he'd often talk about this and how the Charlottesville white nationalist rally was really a wake-up call for him. As he used to say, hate never hides. It just, hate never goes away. It might hide, but it's always under the surface. So I think this is part of the larger argument of his presidency, that he sees this as an existential battle. The forces might change. Right now, obviously, it's a lot about Trump and, as we've talked about, these MAGA Republicans. But it's part of this larger strategy. And then in terms of the midterms, someone I spoke to close to the president that is working with him on this speech made it clear that this was part of the midterm rollout, that his rally last week in Rockville, Maryland, was the more political speech that he was going to give, driving those contrasts between Democrats and Republicans and really elevating Democrats ahead of what is going to be a contested midterm battle. And this is the second part of that, a higher level, more analytical argument about the democracy forces at stake here that he sees threatening what is fundamental to our country. And that's, as you guys have discussed, why he's going to Philadelphia, making that symbolic argument as well.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Rhonda, along those lines, the president has been in Pennsylvania, as we heard from Jorge, already this week, and he talked about law and order earlier this week. That's typically a theme that Republicans try to tout as being something they are strong on. How is President Biden trying to flip that script?
Yeah, the party that's tough on crime often is the one that can sway voters, specifically voters who may be not identifying with the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. They may see themselves somewhere in the middle lane. When you talk about crime, that's something that affects everyone. So that's something that has been compelling for decade after decade in American elections. So he's sort of kind of taking that baton back right now, saying the Democratic Party is aware that crime is up, but we don't want to say that we're going to defund the police. We want to fund them. He spent a lot of time in that earlier speech in Pennsylvania earlier this week saying that we are for equipping them with what they need in order to get the job done and help people in the rise in crime that people are seeing across the country. So it does seem like a narrative that they know will work with a lot of voters, and certainly an important narrative, but it's typically something that Republicans often tap into and tell people, the Democrats are the party that will let, criminals loose and try to sway people that way. But it does seem like Biden really wants to stick with that narrative of saying, no, we want to help law enforcement and we want to be at the forefront of bringing crime down.
Tyler, it seems like Republicans gave the president an opening by criticizing the FBI and trying to defend former President Trump in the Mar-a-Lago search and seizure. And then also there's this question of January 6th and the police that were injured, the police who lost their lives in the aftermath.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that the president and his aides and other Democratic officials have been making for months as Republicans have rallied around, or some Republicans have rallied around this call to defund the FBI. And then we heard the president make very pointed remarks earlier this week in Pennsylvania, of all places, talking about how can the Republican Party be the party that supports law enforcement if many of their supporters were marching on January 6th. And we've all seen those horrible images of law enforcement officials trying to fight back against those rioters. And another part of this law enforcement debate is overfunding of the police. And Joe Biden, as a candidate and continued to do so as president, has been very clear that he has opposed any calls to defund the police. In fact, he has proposed and Democrats have passed more funding for police officers. This is one of the places where he was criticized by activists in his own party for how he has handled this issue. But you're exactly right. This is an issue that they are eager to draw contrast on with Republicans, particularly as it relates to January 6th and in the ensuing months as we continue to see the investigation into former President Trump play out in Florida.
Well, top House Republican Kevin McCarthy gave a pre-Buttle speech this evening, painting a gloom and doom image of the American economy, public safety, and Democrats' leadership. So let's listen.
When the president speaks tonight at Independence Hall, the first lines out of his mouth should be to apologize for slandering tens of millions of Americans as fascists. President Biden wants to talk about the soul of the nation. Tonight, he will say democracy is at stake.
All right, James, let's go to you on this.
You remember back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton said that half of Donald Trump's supporters were a basket of deplorables and how much of a backlash that created, how Donald Trump used it? That's what Kevin McCarthy is trying to do with that riff we just saw, saying that when Joe Biden is talking about MAGA forces, he's really talking about all Republicans. Donald Trump's been saying the last 2 weeks that the FBI didn't search his home. They're not coming after him. They're coming after you, to his supporters. This is part of a Republican strategy to try and pivot. McCarthy in that speech also said that Biden is talking about democracy because he doesn't want to talk about inflation and immigration. This is a strategy that I think we're going to see a lot more of in the home stretch, largely, Libby, to turn out Republican base voters without Donald Trump's name on the ballot. In a lot of states, Trump's pick didn't win the primary, but saying that the President Biden is attacking Trump supporters could get them to the polls in November.
So, Tyler, the White House is not backing off of this, right? So talk to us about what we should be listening for tonight in terms of how aggressive President Biden is on this question of the MAGA movement and what it stands for.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's exactly what I'm watching for tonight. I spoke with some advisors of the president who said it has become clear that how explicit Biden is in calling out these forces or these individuals, the more he's able to break through, the more he's able to reach a wider audience. And so I think what I'm looking for tonight is how explicit he is. You know, we've heard him really criticize former President Trump, but we haven't heard him name names. We heard Karine Jean-Pierre name specific members of Congress who they saw as dangerous in the rhetoric that they were using about defunding the FBI or attacking other members of Congress. But some of these exact politicians that Biden and his aides and other Democrats are warning about are on the ballot in key states. As you discussed, Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, who was at the Capitol on January 6th. There are candidates in Arizona who have repeated some of the same lies about the election that Donald Trump had. And so whether or not Joe Biden, he is not expected to call them out by name, but it'll be interesting to see how explicit he gets and how granular he gets in terms of defining these threats and how explicit that language is. They're saying this is not a political speech. He's going to rise above that. But again, as we've discussed, a lot of these people are on the ballot in November. And as much as his rally in Rockville was the political kickoff for the midterms, this is the argument he's making for why Democrats need to prevail in order to, in his words, save democracy. And so we'll see, through tonight and then moving forward, how explicit he gets in terms of naming those threats.
Rhonda, what will you be listening to through the lens of someone who covers Congress and is thinking about the midterm elections and how lawmakers and people running for office are going to be listening tonight and thinking about how to incorporate or distance themselves from the Biden message?
I'm going to be listening for how Biden strikes that tone of being nonpartisan, because that's pretty important right now, and I think that would work toward any strategy the Democrats want to get more voters on their side. You see where this is at. You see it's at a very symbolic place for a lot of Americans and certainly for American history, and that's purposeful, as we've talked about earlier. And so to be there making this a primetime speech, I'm going to listen to, and I would expect, just as Tyler said, that this this would not include too many partisan, barbs and any sort of pointed fingers. But what he may do, just like he did earlier this week, is draw a line and say, this is what's happening with this extremist group, and what side are you on? And that might get around some of the pointed partisanship. But given that this is a speech scheduled so that many Americans can sit down and watch it, I would expect him not to give too partisan of a tone.
We'll be going live to Philadelphia as soon as President Biden walks out there and gets to that podium. James, there is a way to talk politics without necessarily going on the attack, because there are so many issues that Americans are really concerned about right now, ranging from abortion to the economy.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if he touches on those at all. I think he's going to talk about how these MAGA forces want to take us backward. How much does he get into reproductive rights, for example? What I'm going to be watching for, Libby, is how much does he stick to script? This is a primetime speech. You can see the teleprompters there flanking the podium. When he was in Wilkes-Barre earlier this week giving that crime speech, I had the prepared text in front of me as I was watching him deliver it. He veered wildly off of that script, riffed quite a bit. Typically, you wouldn't want to do that in a carefully crafted, choreographed message like this. And that's often where Biden makes news. The semi-fascism bit wasn't in a vetted script. It was something that Biden said off the cuff. Will he go off the cuff tonight? We'll see.
Biden has a special relationship with the city of Philadelphia and, of course, the state of Pennsylvania, James.
He likes to call himself Pennsylvania's third senator. His house in Wilmington, Delaware is literally a half-hour drive from Independence Hall. He represented that state in the Senate for 36 years. Philadelphia, in a lot of ways, is Biden sees it a suburb of Wilmington. Wilmington's really a suburb of Philadelphia. He obviously, as we've mentioned, he's going to be there 3 times in a week. He's going back to Pittsburgh, the other side of the state, on Monday for Labor Day. Biden cares deeply. It's very personal for him to win this state again in 2024.
All right, James Hohmann, Tyler Pager, Rhonda Colvin, and all of our colleagues, thank you so much. We go now to the grounds of Independence National Historic Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. President Biden will be delivering this speech that the White House says is about the battle for the soul of the nation. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. Please join us after President Biden wraps up his remarks for analysis.
Please welcome the President of the United States and Dr. Jill Biden.
Man, Michael is right.
My fellow Americans, please, if you have a seat, take it. I speak to you tonight from sacred ground in America, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is where America made its Declaration of Independence to the world more than 2 centuries ago with an idea unique among nations, that in America, we're all created equal. This is where the United States Constitution was written and debated. This is where we set in motion the most extraordinary experiment of self-government the world has ever known. With 3 simple words: we the people, we the people. These 2 documents and the ideas they embody equality, and democracy are the rock upon which this nation is built. They are how we became the greatest nation on earth. They are why, for more than 2 centuries, America has been a beacon to the world. But as I stand here tonight, equality and democracy are under assault. We do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise. So tonight, I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet these threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if only we choose it. We must never forget, we the people are the true heirs of the American experiment that began more than 2 centuries ago. We the people have burning inside of each of us the flame of liberty that was lit here at Independence Hall. A flame that lit our way through abolition, the Civil War, suffrage, the Great Depression, world wars, civil rights. That sacred flame still burns. Now in our time, as we build an America that is more prosperous, free, and just. That is the work of my presidency, a mission I believe in with my whole soul. But first, we must be honest with each other and with ourselves. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country. These are hard things, but I'm an American president, not a president of red America or blue America, but of all America. And I believe it's my duty to level with you, to tell the truth, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful. And here, in my view, is what is true. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love. They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country. They look at the mob that stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th, brutally attacking law enforcement, not as insurrectionists who placed a dagger at the throat of our democracy, but they look at them as patriots. And they see their MAGA failure to stop a peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election as preparation for the 2022 and 2024 elections. They tried everything last time to nullify the votes of 81 million people. This time, they're determined to succeed in thwarting the will of the people. That's why respected conservatives like Federal Circuit Court Judge Michael Ludwig has called Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans, quote, a clear and present danger to our democracy. But while the threat to American democracy is real, I want to say as clearly as we can, we are not powerless in the face of these threats. We are not bystanders in this ongoing attack on democracy. There are far more Americans from every background and belief who reject the extreme MAGA ideology than those that accept it. And folks, it's within our power, it's in our hands, yours and mine, to stop the assault on American democracy. I believe America is at an inflection point, one of those moments that determine the shape of everything that's to come after. And now, America must choose to move forward or to move backwards, to build a future or obsess about the past, to be a nation of hope and unity and optimism, or a nation of fear, division, and of darkness. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies. But together we can choose a different path. We can choose a better path forward to the future. A future of possibility, a future to build and dream and hope. And we're on that path moving ahead. I know this nation. I know you, the American people. I know your courage. I know your hearts. And I know our history. This is a nation that honors our Constitution. We do not reject it. This is a nation that believes in the rule of law. We do not repudiate it. This is a nation that respects free and fair elections. We honor the will of the people. We do not deny it. And this is a nation that rejects violence as a political tool. We do not encourage violence. We are still an America that believes in honesty and decency and respect for others. Patriotism, liberty, justice for all, hope, possibilities. We are still, at our core, a democracy. And yet, history tells us that blind loyalty to a single leader and a willingness to engage in political violence is fatal to democracy. For a long time, we've told ourselves that American democracy is guaranteed, but it's not. We have to defend it, protect it, stand up for it, each and every one of us. That's why tonight, I'm asking our nation to come together, unite behind the single purpose of defending our democracy regardless of your ideology. We're all called by duty and conscience to confront extremists who put their own pursuit of power above all else. Democrats, independents, mainstream Republicans, we must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving American democracy than MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy. We, the people, will not let anyone or anything tear us apart. Today, there are dangers around us we cannot allow to prevail. We hear, you've heard it, more and more talk about violence as an acceptable political tool in this country. It's not. It can never be an acceptable tool. So I want to say this plain and simple. There is no place for political violence in America, period. None, ever. We saw law enforcement brutally attacked on January 6th. We've seen election officials, poll workers, many of them volunteers of both parties, subject to intimidation and death threats. And can you believe it? FBI agents, just doing their job as directed, facing threats to their own lives from their own fellow citizens. On top of that, there are public figures today, yesterday, and the day before predicting and all but calling for mass violence and rioting in the streets. This is inflammatory. It's dangerous. It's against the rule of law. And we, the people, must say, this is not who we are. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't be pro-insurrectionist and pro-American. They're incompatible. We can't allow violence to be normalized in this country. It's wrong. We each have to reject political violence with all the moral clarity and conviction this nation can muster. Now, we can't let the integrity of our elections be undermined, for that is a path to chaos. Look, I know politics can be fierce and mean and nasty in America. I get it. I believe in the give and take of politics, in disagreement and debate and dissent. We're a big, complicated country. But democracy endures only if we, the people, respect the guardrails of the republic. Only if we, the people, accept the results of free and fair elections. Only if we, the people, see politics not as total war, but mediation of our differences. Democracy cannot survive when one side believes there are only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated. And that's where the MAGA Republicans are today. They don't understand what every patriotic American knows. You can't love your country only when you win. It's fundamental. American democracy only works only if we choose to respect the rule of law and the institutions that were set up in this chamber behind me. Only if we respect our legitimate political differences. I will not stand by and watch. I will not the will of the American people be overturned by wild conspiracy theories and baseless evidence-free claims of fraud. I will not stand by and watch elections in this country stolen by people who simply refuse to accept that they lost. I will not stand by and watch the most fundamental freedom in this country, the freedom to vote, and have your vote counted and be taken from you and the American people. Look, as your president, I will defend our democracy with every fiber of my being, and I'm asking every American to join me. Throughout our history, America has often made the greatest progress coming out of some of our darkest moments, like you're hearing that bullhorn. I believe we can and must do that again. And we are. MAGA Republicans look at America and see carnage and darkness and despair. They spread fear and lies. Lies told for profit and power. But I see a different America. An America with an unlimited future. An America that's about to take off. I hope you see it as well. Just look around. I believe we could lift America from the depths of COVID. So we passed the largest economic recovery package since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and today America's economy is faster, stronger than any other advanced nation in the world. We have more to go. I believe we could build a better America. So we passed the biggest infrastructure investment since President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And we've now embarked on a decade of rebuilding the nation's roads, bridges, highways, ports, water systems, high-speed internet, railroads. I believe we could make America safer, So we passed the most significant gun safety law since President Clinton. I believe we could go from being the highest cost of prescriptions in the world to making prescription drugs and healthcare more affordable. So we passed the most significant healthcare reform since President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act. And I believe we could create a clean energy future and save the planet. So we passed the most important climate initiative ever, ever, ever. The cynics and the critics tell us nothing can get done, but they're wrong. There is not a single thing America cannot do, not a single thing beyond our capacity if we do it together. It's never easy, but we're proving that America, no matter how long the road, progress does come. Look, I know the last few years have been tough, but today, COVID no longer controls our lives. More Americans are working than ever. Businesses are growing, our schools are open. Millions of Americans have been lifted out of poverty. Millions of veterans once exposed to toxic burn pits will now get what they deserve for their families and their compensation. American manufacturers come alive across the heartland, and the future will be made in America. No matter what the white supremacists and the extremists say, I made a bet on you, the American people, and that bet is paying off, proving that from darkness, the darkness of Charlottesville, of COVID, of gun violence, of insurrection, we can see the light. Light is now visible. Light that will guide us forward, not only in words, but in actions. Actions for you, for your children, for your grandchildren, for America. Even in this moment, with all the challenges we face, I give you my word as a Biden, I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Not because of me, but because of who you are. We're going to end cancer as we know it. Mark my words. We're going to create millions of new jobs in a clean energy economy. We're going to think big. We're going to make the 21st century another American century because the world needs us to. That's where we need to focus our energy. Not in the past, not on divisive culture wars, not on the politics of grievance, but on a future we can build together. The MAGA Republicans believe that for them to succeed, everyone else has to fail. They believe America not like I believe about America. I believe America is big enough for all of us to succeed. And that is the nation we're building, a nation where no one is left behind. I ran for president because I believe we're in a battle for the soul of this nation. I still believe that to be true. I believe the soul is the breath, the life, and the essence of who we are. The soul is what makes us us. The soul of America is defined by the sacred proposition that all are created equal in the image of God, that all are entitled to be treated with decency, dignity, and respect, that all deserve justice and a shot at lives of prosperity and consequence, and that democracy must be defended, for democracy makes all these things possible. Folks, and it's up to us. Democracy begins and will be preserved in we, the people's habits of the heart, in our character, optimism that is tested yet endures, courage that digs deep when we need it, empathy that fuels democracy, the willingness to see each other not as enemies but as fellow Americans. Look, our democracy isn't perfect. It always has been. Notwithstanding those folks you hear on the other side there, they're entitled to be outrageous. This is a democracy. But history and common sense Good manners is nothing they've ever suffered from. But history and common sense tell us that opportunity, liberty, and justice for all are most likely to come to pass in a democracy. We have never fully realized the aspirations of our founding, but every generation has opened those doors a little bit wider to include more people who have been excluded before. My fellow Americans, America is an idea, the most powerful idea in the history of the world, and it beats in the hearts of the people of this country. It beats in all our hearts. It unites America. It is the American creed, the idea that America guarantees that everyone be treated with dignity. It gives hate no safe harbor. It installs in everyone the belief that no matter where you start in life, there's nothing you can't achieve. That's who we are. That's what we stand for. That's what we believe. And that's precisely what we're doing. Opening doors, creating possibilities, focusing on the future. And we're only just beginning. Our task is to make our nation free and fair, just and strong, noble and whole. And this work is the work of democracy, the work of this generation. It is the work of our time, for all time. We can't afford to leave anyone on the sidelines. We need everyone to do their part. So speak up, speak out, get engaged, vote, vote, vote. And if we do our duty, in 2022 and beyond, then ages still to come will say, we, all of us here, we kept the faith. We preserved democracy. We heeded our worst. We heeded not our worst instincts, but our better angels. We proved that for all its imperfections, America is still the beacon to the world, an ideal to be realized, a promise to be kept. There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred, nothing more American. That's our soul. That's who we truly are. And that's who we must always be. I have no doubt, none, that this is who we will be, and that we'll come together as a nation that will secure our democracy, that for the next 200 years, we'll have what we had the past 200 years, the greatest nation on the face of the earth. We just need to remember who we are. We are the United States of America, the United States of America. And may God protect our nation, and may God protect all those who stand watch over our democracy. God bless you all. Democracy. Thank you.
President Joe Biden saying Donald Trump and his followers represent an extremism that threatens the very foundation of our republic. In a speech from the grounds of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the president went directly at his predecessor and his supporters. He mixed a call for civic responsibility with a campaign rallying cry. This is a special report from the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and my guests tonight are James Hohman and Rhonda Colvin. Rhonda, let's talk about the focus of Biden's speech and the tone tonight.
The tone was what we really expected, and I would break it up into maybe three themes. First off, he established that this extremism is dangerous, that it is real, that it is happening. He did name names. well, pretty much former President Trump is who he said is responsible for a lot of this. We weren't sure if he was going to be that pointed, but he was. He also said this is not all Republicans. He did make that clear, that he wanted to make that distinction between MAGA Republicanism and the Republicanism that he's very familiar with, of course, as a longtime senator and now president. But that last bit, that third bit was, candidate Biden. He was imploring people to vote. He was saying that he would not allow this to happen on his watch, people attacking the election system. He also went and did a bit of a victory lap about all the things that he's been able to accomplish in the last few months. The Inflation Reduction Act, bringing prescription drug costs down. He talked about the burn pits legislation that went in, that passed and was able to help veterans. He went through kind of that laundry list of things that he's been able to accomplish. So you saw that mix of, yes, the politics of the day, how the Democrats have a little bit of momentum that they are hoping to build on, but you also heard at that first part of his speech that he is pointing the finger at Trump and saying that this is not all Republicans, but it is a sect that is creating an inflection point that we need to make a decision now to decide which way we're going to go.
James Hohmann, I'd like to hear your response to the president's speech.
It was a mishmash. It was two different speeches merged into one. It sounded strident. It sounded quite partisan, including the vote there. It was not what the White House previewed in that respect. And I think part of it is that those hecklers and protesters got into the president's head. He was angry. He was yelling. The lighting in the backdrop was bad. I think what happened is that the White House advance team had the American flag, red, white, and blue, but all you could see on the camera shots at home for anyone watching was the red, which was quite an ominous color. I thought the most powerful moment of the speech was when Biden went off script to engage with the hecklers, to say this is democracy, this is what they're entitled to do, you should be able to do it, and then said these folks have never suffered from having manners. That was the kind of authenticity, rawness that is quintessentially Joe Biden. But this was not one of the president's best speeches.
Rhonda, there were some references certainly to January 6th and to this question of the threat to democracy. And I heard him mention Judge Michael Luttig has called Trump extreme. Has called Trump and the MAGA Republicans a clear and present danger to our democracy. He also talked about not standing by and watching while votes are overturned, while conspiracy theories are floated. Talk to us about both the call out to this work that the January 6th committee is doing, but also this push of Biden to say, I am the president and I will not stand for this.
Well, he is using that position as president to say that this is why he's taking the opportunity to address these things. I think anyone knows that these issues that we face with extremism, these are things that our intelligence committee or our intelligence community has been warning members of Congress about, and it's certainly been ratcheted up in the last few years. So he did want to point that out, and that line that he said that he would not stand by when people don't like the results of an election and want to steal it. He's not going to stand by. That might have been a little foreshadowing. I think a lot of people do expect that this November 8th midterm election is going to be a bit contentious. Many forecast that we may not have results in the days after, and they're certainly going to be contested. You already have people going to secretaries of state's homes. In Michigan, that was one case where angry voters went to her home and harassed her and her family. You have situations in places like Nevada where election workers are very concerned of how this is all going to play out because they've had to address angry voters who did not like the results of the election and had to deal with that. So there is likely going to be a lot of contention that surrounds the days after this election, and perhaps he was foreshadowing that. I think that's something that a lot of people are aware of might happen in the climate that we're now living in.
Let's go now to Jorge Ribas, who joins us from outside Independence Hall, where the president just delivered his remarks. Jorge, how was the speech received there?
Yeah, Libby, amongst the crowd here, very enthusiastically. There was a lot of big applause moments. At the beginning, I found it interesting. I believe by my count, he only mentioned former President Trump once early on, but referenced that kind of extreme MAGA ideology consistently. And some of the bigger applause moments that I saw was when he called upon all Americans and said that all Americans should reject this kind of extremist ideology. Some of the moments when he talked about having, he knew that there was mainstream Republicans, independents, people who didn't follow this MAGA ideology, that elicited a lot of applause. One of the biggest cheers, again, was when he referenced how political violence has no place in America. That elicited cheers and applause amongst the whole crowd. He talked, and he specifically referenced January 6th. He talked about the attacks on the FBI after the Mar-a-Lago raid. He referenced, not in name, but Senator Lindsey Graham talking about how there would be riots in the streets if President Trump was indicted. He talked about that, and that elicited the most. And then I thought it was really interesting when he did engage with the hecklers that were just behind me on the street outside of the park. A small group of protesters with bullhorns and sirens, and they started early in the speech. He kind of referenced them a little bit, and then he made a direct reference to them. And I thought him saying that they had a right to be there. I mean, he's talking about democracy, and I thought it was interesting that he said, they had a right to be there. It said they didn't have manners, but he did say they had a right to protest. He got a lot of cheers and hoots, people whistling, and when he's referenced them directly, maybe to drown out a little bit of their protests. But, that kind of back and forth, it seemed very, he got angry. He I don't know if angry is the right word, but he got, a little more forceful when he talked after that.
Thanks so much, Jorge Ribas, there with all that music in Philadelphia. Really appreciated, Jorge. Well, President Biden was careful to say that he wasn't talking about all Republicans, but he did outline what he sees as a threat posed by MAGA Republicans. Let's watch.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
So, James Hohmann, we knew that President Biden was going to try to separate out the MAGA Republicans from other people who he'd love to find alliances with and love to see not be as much of a stumbling block for his party in November. Talk to us about the expectation we had coming into this, of this being a speech that was not as divisive, that was not pushing Republicans away quite as hard, and then what we ended up with.
Yeah, mainstream versus MAGA is certainly a welcome contrast. It also does represent, in some ways, the continuation of his message going back to Charlottesville and fighting for the soul of the nation. And in other ways, it is a shift. I remember watching Joe Biden announce his presidential campaign back in 2019 in Philadelphia, and really leaning into the idea that he could break the fever, that if Donald Trump was no longer president, he had all these relationships from 36 years in the Senate and 8 years as vice president, and that he could work with people like Mitch McConnell and pass lots of bipartisan bills. And it has not worked out that way, in large part because, as we just heard the president say in that speech, Donald Trump still continues to control the Republican Party even after January 6th. And so you've seen this evolution of Biden saying Republicans are actually reasonable, if not for Trump, to there are two kinds of Republicans, mainstream and MAGA. The deeper thing that I think going on, Libby, is that Biden wants to present the midterm elections as less a referendum on him or the economy and more a choice between Biden and Democrats and Donald Trump and these MAGA Republicans. It sounds like that's where he's going, and it sort of makes sense. That Wall Street Journal poll that was released today showed that in a head-to-head matchup, if Donald Trump and Joe Biden were on the ballot right now, Biden would beat Trump 50% to 44%. So there's certainly a logic in that approach.
Let's listen to more of how President Biden framed this division tonight.
MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself.
So, Rhonda, how effective was that messaging?
That really is a question. How effective is this going to be? A lot of people know what he went over there about MAGA Republicans, how that there is, a group of people who consider themselves more mainstream and may be tiring of the headlines that talk about, attacks on FBI agents or some of the extremism we're seeing at the ballot box. He may be able to tap into people's fatigue with what's going on and the danger that's going on. But of course, Biden as well as Democrats in Congress have a tough hill to climb because of things like inflation. Those are things that people are assessing every day when they go to, the grocery store, when they take their kids, back to school shopping. Things are quite higher. And Republicans, that is one thing that they have been doing for the last few months, is sticking to their messaging on inflation and how Democrats are the cause of it, or at least have not done enough to help people. And that is extremely effective. You can talk to any economist and they will tell you that that type of issue certainly will sway voters who, may not be decided, may not strongly identify with either party, but if they're, having problems meeting bills, that is a very influential issue in households.
So, James, where do you see this going from here? It's Labor Day weekend coming up. It's this kickoff of the midterm season. Although for anyone who reads the Washington Post and follows politics, they've probably already been deep in that frothy midterm season for a while. What changes now?
Both sides really start to tune in. And you're right, people watching at home and people who read the Post have been following this for a long time. But we've seen a significant uptick in the percentage of Americans who say that they're likely to vote. The number has increased significantly among Democrats since the Dobbs decision in June. Republicans already were pretty enthusiastic about voting. Now both sides are very enthusiastic. And I expect that you are going to see Biden continue to press this case. One of the historical parallels that I saw while watching tonight's speech was Richard Nixon's silent majority speech in the 60s, where amid the mass protests to the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, Richard Nixon said, look, I want to speak for the silent majority of Americans who aren't out in the streets. And if Biden can successfully make that case, tonight he one of his lines was, far more Americans reject MAGA ideology than embrace it. If Biden can make the midterms a referendum on MAGA ideology, Democrats will far outperform expectations. The challenge is separating the fight against Trumpism and MAGA ideology from the more kind of traditional liberal planks in Biden's agenda. And the risk for Democrats and for Biden in particular is that when you conflate them, when you merge them together, it turns off independents and it turns off those mainstream Republicans who Democrats need to cross over in the fall if they're going to hold on to Congress.
President Biden rattled through his list of what he sees as accomplishments, from the Inflation Reduction Act to that bipartisan gun safety bill. Rhonda, where do you see that fitting in both the appeal the president's trying to make to the American public and also this night, right? This night that was about the battle for the soul of democracy.
Well, it fits in because it goes back to what I said at the top of our show, is that he is dealing with timing in two ways. Timing about how politically advantageous this is, that he has some momentum he can work with. He's also very aware that we're around, 70 days until the midterm election, and that if there is any opportunity for him, now might be the time to tell America that I've gotten this done, because things, a year ago or even 6 months ago, especially on the Hill, didn't look too promising for Joe Biden. Biden. So I think he did try to cobble together both the political aspects of his job and in being that standard bearer for his party, but he also wanted to be, or at least try to be a president for Americans to listen to about their concerns about extremism.
What will you be watching over the next couple of weeks as we get into this official fall season?
How will Democrats keep this momentum up? We know, you can look at any historical races and how they can change. There could be a natural disaster, weeks from now that may change the game a little bit. There are all sorts of shifts that can happen. How are Democrats going to try to hold on to this momentum that they've received kind of late in the game? But of course, right now, as states are finalizing their primary season, you're seeing candidates run and do a lot of campaigning on the ground. How are Democrats going to try to take this momentum to at least make the midterm elections more competitive than maybe they were forecasted to be several months ago?
James, final thoughts from you on what you'll be watching going forward from the White House and from the congressional races?
Well, Libby, the most important part of President Biden's speech tonight was saying clearly and unequivocally that political violence is unacceptable. It's scary that we're in a place in our country's history where the President of the United States needs to say that, and saying that is newsworthy. But we have seen a significant uptick in threats. We obviously saw the insurrection on January 6th. We're seeing surging threats against lawmakers, against law enforcement. It's a very, very scary time. And it really is important for leaders in both parties to make very clear that political violence is never acceptable. I also thought President Biden ended on an optimistic note. I thought that his line saying, "I believe America is big enough for all of us," is the kind of optimistic message that really can resonate going forward. And Americans, especially against the backdrop of Trump being so angry and so divisive, there's a real opening for the president in this home stretch before the midterms to transcend partisan politics. And he struggled to do that tonight, but he has it in him.
Well, a primetime speech setting the tone from the White House for this fall and the midterm elections. President Biden warning about the fragility of democracy, warning about his concerns of the MAGA movement, and also touting what he sees as his campaign pledges and accomplishments. Thank you for watching tonight with the newsroom of the Washington Post. A special thanks to Rhonda and James. I'm Libby Casey. Have a good night.
Sometimes you have to see to believe and witness history as it unfolds. When the news is breaking, watch with the newsroom of the Washington Post. We explain what's happening and why it matters.
Thank you for choosing to watch the headlines as they're being written by our journalists. You can subscribe with a special offer at washingtonpost.com/watch. Subscribing through that link lets everyone here, from the front lines to the control room, know that you care about our continued efforts to inform the public,
Protect the First Amendment, and foster a healthy democracy. We could not do this without you.